Okay, we'll just give it a couple more minutes to get the webinar people logged in. But if you're on Facebook Live, good afternoon. I'm here with Dr. Adam Frose, Valley Sleep Center's behavioral sleep medicine specialist. And he specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. But we're all stressed right now, right, Dr. Frose? I mean, what a better way to deal with it than a stress tool belt. I cannot wait to hear what you have to offer. So we'll wait a couple more minutes and I'll let you share your screen. Thank you so much for doing this. I know
of course. My pleasure.
Myself, I get stressed easily. So it's going to be really great.
Well, especially I'll say in terms of the stress and prepping for this chat, I was looking into some specifics. So the first thing that I'm going to get to is where we're at as a nation right now, which, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And, clearly with COVID and some other things going on, that makes sense. But, yeah, hopefully things start to smooth out and we'll go over some ways to do that. So
hopefully we can help you all find some peace in a stressful time. All right, well, we can get started if you want. Thank you again.
Okay. Absolutely. Okay, so let me switch this over.
I'll be on standby watching.
Okay, sounds good. So, for everyone out there on Facebook, for anyone who's calling in, this is the Stress Tool Belt. Again, I'm Dr. Frose. I'm a Valley Sleep Center's behavioral sleep medicine specialist. I'm also a psychologist. So I chose this picture actually specifically because, I mean, the thing is, when it comes to stress, there is not one approach that works, right? And obviously, being at Valley Sleep, this is how stress can impact sleep as well. You want to identify a lot of different types of skills that you utilize, whether it is relaxation, whether it is actually looking at where anxiety and stress is coming from in terms of not needing to distract our mind, more so getting to a place where we can work through our thoughts. And I'll talk a bit about what I mean particularly, but other skills, sleep regulation. I mean, obviously, I always like to talk about the specific sleep aspect, so we'll get to that as well. Lots of different things when it comes to stress and our tool belt. So the agenda, we're looking at stress as a whole, we're looking at our mind, we're looking at our body, and how it's impacting sleep. So right off the bat, stress in 2020, it's a stressful time. 78% of Americans say that the pandemic has been a significant source of stress. No surprises there. 83% of Americans say the future of our nation, however, is a significant source of stress. That, it was a bit higher than what I was anticipating. That's more than 4 out of every 5. Big number there. And then 72% of Americans report that this is the lowest point in the nation's history that they can remember. So there is a trifecta of things hitting us at the moment. Some more stats. This is from the American Psychological Association, again, honing in on the future of our nation and stress. So, over the last 4 years, it's risen to 63. We're looking at how we're defining stress. But either way, those are big numbers. These are huge percentages of people that are having stress on a day-to-day basis. So how does this impact things, particularly sleep? Stress decreases sleep quality and quantity. I mean, again, that's not this is not rocket science. If you're rigid, if your body is very tense, if your mind is active, it's going to be harder to sleep. And we'll get into what is stress, particularly what causes stress. So there are different forms of stress, and actually there's this, now that I think about it, I'm going to go over the acute stress and long-term stress, right, the impacts. there is also something else called eustress. So eustress. That's a good form of stress, right? So it's almost like butterflies in the stomach and we're excited about something. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is more so significant, temporary stressors. So what happens? We have increased levels of cortisol and adrenaline when particularly we are faced with a stressor. This is engaging the sympathetic nervous system so that we are better able to have this fight, flight, freeze response. So we're better able to avoid danger. Again, this from a evolutionary or from a physiological standpoint, this is to help us survive, right? So think actual serious threats, large animals coming at us, whatever it is. Over time, clearly, on a day-to-day basis, most of us in most professions, obviously there are some professions that are in very dangerous situations at times, but for the most of us, we don't have this kind of deep-seated, violent type of stress going on, but we start to associate, other types of things with this degree of stress. So temporary stressors can come from various places. So for example, financial stressors or working too much or being burned out or concern over the economy or the pandemic or the future of the nation or X, Y, and Z, right? It's different for most people. No one is the same. But that's acute. So long term, when we have stress over time, day in, day out, we get overwhelmed. What can happen is a feeling of being more numb. I mean, truly, like from an emotional standpoint, actually being in a place where we have less. It's more of there aren't as many quote unquote highs, not as many lows. We're numbed out to the world, right? And this can also increase feelings of hopelessness. We're not supposed to sustain high stress levels for long periods of time. Again, think back to kind of this evolutionary, physiological standpoint. At some point, we should be out of immediate danger and stress levels should go down. Because stress has become, or it is coming from a different source in the last several hundred years, then it becomes one of those things that it's not a bear chasing us. It's more so from the financial difficulties, concerns that are coming on, or something that can sustain stress for a high period of time in which we perceive this stress to be occurring for a long period of time. So, and notice I mentioned perceive. This is not to say that there is no stress in the world and we should all feel fine and dandy all the time. Yet our mind impacts this. So how we process information is ultimately where stress comes from. And I love this little tiny quote here that anxiety is simply unmet expectations. So you could substitute anxiety for stress, whatever. Think about it. If you are, let's say, because most people love public speaking, clearly, technically they dislike public speaking on average more than the fear of death. But so let's say in a situation, let's say a job function, you knew 3 weeks beforehand you're going to give a speech, right? And if you're one of those people that doesn't like speeches in particular, you may have a lower level of stress. I mean, you may technically have anticipatory stress, but maybe a little bit less. You could prepare, whatever, right? However, if your expectation is, I'm just going to this function, I'm not going to do anything, I don't need, and on the spot, hey, give this 5-minute talk, right? This is an unmet expectation. That is where stress comes from. That's where anxiety comes from. Ultimately, we are telling ourselves something should be different, right? What is occurring is different than what should be occurring, what we are telling ourselves. So again, this isn't to say that, the pandemic is going on and we should be fine and dandy again about this. No. What we want to start looking at is what we are telling ourselves about this external event. And clearly everyone may have different experiences with COVID, and it is, this talk, I want to make a point to say that this is not something that I'm saying that this is not a serious issue or this is not really impactful. It definitely is. But we really want to hone in on what is going on in our mind that can impact stress, how we perceive information, what we tell ourselves about what's going on, then impacts our level of stress often. There's a very big difference between saying the end is nigh, right, and believing the world is going to blow up, so to speak, as opposed to saying to yourself, this is a difficult time. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to try and figure out the best game plan I can, and we're going to take things a day at a time. Two different approaches, most likely going to have very different reactions in terms of how much stress that we have. So what we think about expands. So I'm really honing in on some of my favorite phrases here in terms of talking about stress. But this, it's so true, and it's something that so few people really, really understand, that you become what you think about all day long, right? Think about it. The individuals that and I'm anticipating for anyone out there that's cluing into this, or if it's being recorded and you're watching this later on, if you're one of those people that's often stressed, what is on your mind? Take a second to think. What are you often thinking about throughout the day? What is your autopilot? By autopilot, when we're not really present, when we're going from day to day to thing to thing to thing during the day, what's going on, right? Usually we all have kind of like a norm, an autopilot. Some people it's figure this out, worry about this, think about this, whatever. Other people it's much more laid back. And so what you think about during the day then becomes more of your experience, becomes more of a factor that impacts stress levels. So, this talk is about a tool belt, right? So I've been doing a lot of talking about stress, and the key is to be more mindful. Think about it. Stress comes from the mind. It has to. I can't find out your address, go on Amazon and ship you a box of stress. It's just one of those things where our mind is what is impacting, our stress level. And so if the problem is then in the mind, the solution must also then be in the mind. So mindfulness is where we want to get to. So this is not speaking of becoming a yogi Buddhist monk on top of a mountain floating, with clouds around them. Mindfulness is simply just having more calm and single-minded thoughts. That's what it comes down to. And it's a skill. It's like riding a bike. Everyone falls off for the first time. Anytime anyone practices meditating, at least that I know of, for the first time, our mind is wired, right? It is used to thought, problem. What's going to happen? How do I fix this? How do I get through this? We want to have more single-minded thoughts. We want to be more aware of what we are telling ourselves, because sometimes a thought in our mind can then become somewhat of like a snowball, and then an avalanche effect will happen. But it stems from a single thought. Again, if you think about any large scale, anything that's ever been built, any company that's ever been created, it started with one thought to a certain degree. I should start a company, I should do this, we should build it, or whatever, right? Thoughts are really important and powerful. So perspective is something that can be helpful with mindfulness, as mindfulness is one of these tools for the tool belt. So, the thing is, you want to use your own evidence. What I mean by that is that you ultimately, whoever, is listening in on this, you are able to view things in hindsight often, most likely that is, and notice that later on, you may be thinking about something differently than you did in the moment. So this slide, think about a difficult experience that you've gone through in the past, right? Something that you've gotten through. Think about, what that is for just a second here. Now, this has happened in the past. I want you to now think about what you would like to tell yourself that went through this difficult experience in that moment, right? Most likely, you felt differently in the moment as you do now, right? It's a change in perspective. So the key is not to be omnipotent and have no stress or no anxiety, but more likely you're talking to yourself in a way that's saying, oftentimes it's more flexible. It's saying, hey, you'll get through this. It's okay. It's not your fault. Whatever it is, it's different for everyone. But it's having a little bit more flexibility. When we're very rigid, like, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible. It's not going to work out. This problem is whatever. That's when, we want to look at how is this then impacting stress? How is this potentially exacerbating stress, increasing stress? So the thing is, how do we use this for the future? So we just talked about basically what's called hindsight bias, understanding something based on the past, right? So now we want to look at, a difficult experience you may be going through right now, right? So think of that. What is that? Could be stress related, could be sleep related. What would your future self tell current self? This may seem kind of, abstract so much, right? A little bit. But the thing is, you want to use your perspective, and this perspective is built on evidence, right? So when you're just viewing something, it's an experience that you had, and if you choose to, you can learn from it. We want to use what you learned in the moment now that potentially future you would be telling you, right? So I know this is a little bit abstract, but this is one of those things. It's about training the mind to be able to look at situations in a certain way, to be able to talk to ourselves in a certain way, and see things a little bit differently from a different perspective. And one of the things that can be very important is placing focus on the things that matter, right? So, obviously, COVID, the pandemic, has impacted stress, and sometimes that is focused on concerns of others' well-being, our own well-being, our own health anxiety, and that kind of thing. But a lot of times when we're looking at stress, sometimes it's also important to be thankful, to have a sense of gratitude for what exists right now, instead of the one problem going on, or the few problems that are going on. Maybe it's looking at all of the good things that are still existing. Keeping that mental state of gratitude. It's not just a motivational poster that is in some room. It really can even the playing field, right? Even if we have a lot of stressful thoughts, if we can balance them, and this is not just positive thinking, this is realistic thinking. This is saying what matters in my life, oftentimes, others usually. It's balancing these things out. So your body is also important to use towards decreasing stress. So if you can think back a little bit when I was talking about what happens during acute stress, I was talking about the sympathetic nervous system and how it's activating, right, to deal with this stressor. Diaphragmatic breathing, for those of you that aren't familiar, is talking about basically stimulating the opposite side of your body. Sympathetic is arousal system that's helping to deal with a stressor. Parasympathetic system, it's based on relax, calming, having the body chill out, so to speak. How we participate in diaphragmatic breathing is through breathing through the diaphragm, breathing through the stomach. That is what is important in order to then stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. We have the body relax itself, calm itself. So, because we don't have a lot of time for this, I'll just briefly say, a helpful kind of exercise is looking at the chest, looking at the stomach. You want this hand to be the one that is increasing when you're breathing. And I'll tell you from experience working with, hundreds, if not more than that, of people specifically with this, is that it sounds simple. When you actually practice it, it is something that can be beneficial, right? So definitely something that can be helpful for the body. Movement exercise is definitely correlated with increased improvements in sleep overall. It's also shown to be helpful with reducing stress, and so that can be a multifactorial in terms of why it reduces stress. But either way, it is important that we have consistent movement and exercise, especially during times when so often we're more isolated and away from others. Relaxation takes a lot of different turns. So, there is deep breathing, like I mentioned, but there's body scan exercises. There is progressive muscle relaxation. So the body scan is often based on being more mindful and aware of different sensations in our body. It's about tuning out a lot of the things that, being in the present, what I have to do in your mind. It's getting out of the past. Oh, this happened. Oh, I feel guilty. Whatever. Also, progressive muscle relaxation, and so this is more so about tensing different muscles throughout your body in kind of a systematic fashion. Usually, it's kind of like head down or feet up kind of approach, where you go body movement, tense, relax, notice the tension resolve, notice the difference, notice the relaxation. Other people will practice meditation. Other people will practice yoga with relaxation. So there's not one singular approach to this, but the key is, if we talk about it, it's not going to make the same impact as if you practice it. So again, body scan, progressive muscle relaxation, meditation, yoga, stretching. I know that obviously we don't have a lot of time to actually get into every specific exercise, but those are some things that can help with relaxation. Even a warm bath at night, something like that. So I mentioned that I always like to go over the specific sleep aspects, because we need to have a change. If we do what we've always done, we will get what we've always got. So we have to make alterations to the pattern, to the cycle, to have a change in the pattern and the cycle of what our sleep looks like. Regularity, going to bed and waking up at similar times, is so important, right? The body has so many different systems going on during a 24-hour basis, right? There's hormone changes, there's temperature changes, there's circadian rhythm changes. There's, we want the body to be set to a specific time. So regularity is important. If we flip-flop day to day, if we change it up, it's hard for the body to get used to something. It decreases sleep efficiency. Creating a similar kind of pattern, a lot of times, again, if we have a similar kind of scenario, a similar kind of wind down kind of thing going on, that can be helpful. body gets used to it, the mind gets used to it. The body is, what's the term? The need for sleep is biological. The process of sleep is learned. Napping is something that certain people can do and it will not throw off their sleep, but the bad sleepers of the world, usually napping is not something we want to do. You want to get really specific and know what is happening if you are taking naps. Ultimately, oftentimes it's based on decreasing our sleep drive. So it's kind of common knowledge that if we don't have as high of a sleep drive during the night, then we're going to have more difficulty either falling or staying asleep. And this is something that most people don't think of. They just think of the falling asleep bit. But no, sometimes you can fall asleep great, and then the nap or issues with sleep are going to impact you in the middle of the night. No heavy meals, alcohol right before bed. We don't want an an alcohol rebound effect. Digestion can actually negatively impact ability to sleep through the night. Caffeine is my friend. I'm not against caffeine. I like coffee in the morning, but early in the day, because it stays in our body, much longer as a stimulant than the somewhat 60 to 120 minute impact that usually we can feel from a psychoactive standpoint. The bedroom being for 3 S's: sleeping, sex, being sick. We want to reduce all the time in there other than the 3 S's. If we're awake in bed, we're training ourselves to be awake in bed. So that is one of the reasons that if you are just laying there for long periods of time, getting up when you can't sleep. Looking at the clock, very rarely is this a thing that helps sleep. Sometimes people will say it's not a big deal, they don't care. More often, it's one of those things that somehow stimulates our mind, whether it's how long have I been asleep, how long has it taken me to fall asleep, how much do I have time? It stimulates, it activates our mind. It kind of turns our mind back on. Instead of being in a relaxed dream state or going to sleep, then it becomes, all right, now questions arise. What time is it? How much time do I have left? How am I going to be tomorrow? Whatever. So usually not looking at the clock is what we want to do. Autopilot, mentioned it earlier. Everyone has a different autopilot. I think that there's a saying that I think rings really true with this. What happens when you squeeze an orange? You get orange juice. It's what's inside, right? Our autopilot is basically what's inside our mind, what our baseline goes to. If we are stressed and there's someone that has a good baseline of practicing mindfulness, of being aware of stressors, of when the stressors are coming up, saying to themselves, all right, how am I doing? How am I going to handle this? Right? I will most likely be able to figure this out. I'm going to be okay. Their autopilot, it's like squeezing the orange, so to speak, and they're going to have a positive autopilot. It's going to be one that's adaptive, that's helpful. Other times the squeeze happens, and then the autopilot, what we go to is, okay, I'm going to worry, I'm going to be concerned, I'm going to not be able to fall asleep, I'm going to think about this until I'm blue in the face, whatever. So it's all about getting a different baseline, getting a different autopilot, figuring out a different process of how to think through things. And this is a simple, pragmatic strategy, but writing things out, during the day can be somewhat helpful, right? So instead of in the middle of the night thinking I need to focus in on, what I have to do tomorrow, if during the day, you've got that list, great. A little bit more complicated if it's in the realm of concerns or worries or other cognitions, other thoughts that are really worrisome or concerning, whatever. So again, though, if you if you have a viewpoint of, I have written this out, I have focused on what I can control, what I cannot control, usually we can have a greater sense of acceptance of, I've done all that I can do right in this moment. But it's important to kind of keep up with this on a day-to-day basis. Having a shrug mindset is important. I'll get it done tomorrow, and being okay with that is important. For the most part, not staying up thinking about things or worrying about things, just being as the world is as it is. Worrying won't change it. That's where we want to get to, with being okay and accepting what's happening and realizing that the day is done. It is over, right? And that's okay. And sometimes, honestly, I know it's easier said than done. But this is a skill, right? This kinds of stuff, they are skills. They're mental mindset kinds of skills. And to a certain degree, if you're one of those people that's very frustrated at night, you want to look at this as not, this is taking away from my sleep. I won't be able to function tomorrow. It's going to be terrible. What's going on? What's wrong with me? That expands. Realize that, all right, well, I will survive tomorrow. I'm going to get through it. If I have a couple extra minutes to be mindful, mindfulness is associated with many, many good things, right? And, in our busy lives, if you're hearing this and you're like most people, maybe you don't have enough time during the day, or at least you haven't in the past. So, hey, this could be somewhat beneficial, being able to take a few moments out to be more mindful, to practice meditation. Light exposure as much as we can, the beginning of the day, and as minimal as we can at the end of the day. So I like to think of this as, the last hour of the day, thinking of yourself as, going back to the 1700s, and technology doesn't exist, right? You have to read by candlelight. You don't have to go that drastic, but it definitely is impactful on your body. It's impactful on the amount of melatonin that can be released naturally. So being aware of light is important. Realizing that all of the stuff that we've talked about, all of these different things are tools. So think about if you saw the original slide and all of these different tools, really, you're not going to be able to gain all of these skills overnight. What I'm talking about here is lifestyle changes, right? And again, if these are skills are acquired, learned, and developed. So it's one of those things that it takes some time, but realize that, the time and effort to acquire and develop this kind of awareness and these skills can be definitely very, very difficult and very worthwhile, though, in the end. So getting a picture sometimes is a good strategy of figuring out where you want to go. If you want to improve your sleep, great. Working with myself here at Valley Sleep, in terms of if it's particularly on sleep, if it's more so in terms of anxiety and depression or another mental health concern, then getting the picture of, okay, focusing and honing in on that with a mental health provider, whether it's a psychiatrist, whether it's, different psychologists, if that's particularly what's going on, if it's not necessarily sleep, it's good to have an idea of where you want to go before, in order to get steps to get there. And again, all of these things take time. You want to focus on 24 hours. You want to realize that if you're changing anything, it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. Humans, we love comfortability. We love getting in patterns and cycles. But don't psych yourself out, with needing to make drastic changes overnight. A lot of times a slow, and steady approach, one that's manageable, can be the most beneficial in the long run. And being able to look at all of the beneficial aspects of adding in a skill, seeing improved sleep or decreased stress, whatever, focusing in on the successes is clearly important as well. So if this is something where you believe that working with myself here at Valley Sleep could be helpful, definitely please let us know how I can be of service. So in terms of scheduling, it's easy. We ask that if you are a current patient of Valley Sleep and you've been identified and checked out with one of our sleep physicians, to make sure that there aren't any other, underlying physical issues going on, such as, sleep apnea or restless legs or something else in that realm. If you've already got that checked out, great. You can, schedule directly with me. If not, then you might want to do that beforehand. So we want to make sure something like that isn't getting in the way. But if that's already sorted out, then, just by going to the scheduling, an appointment online, you can even email in, and the staff here will contact you. So, well,